Welcome to the weekly Canadian Gender Wars Report. This is Shannon Boucher. Today is the 14th of April, 2024, and we've had an incredibly big week in the gender wars in Canada and around the world. This week marks a period of time, I sincerely believe, where we will say it will be a line in the sand. And we will say there was the world before the Cass report and the world after. This line in the sand is a clear demarcation in the gender wars, and institutions and governments are now on notice with irrefutable evidence that gender affirming care is a modern atrocity. I normally talk about, and Melanie Bennett, who usually joins me, who's taking a week off, normally talk about the gender wars in Canada. We normally talk about, I like to focus on media and what media is covering and how they're covering it, because that, I believe, is a story in itself. We live in a censorious environment, in a field of propaganda. We're embedded in a culture of big lies in Canada, and gender is just one of those big lies, but that's our focus. And so I'm going to cover off some things today about the gender wars from a globally informed perspective. Upcoming, the Parents' Rights Coalition of Canada, PRCOC, in May. We haven't finalized the date yet. We're going to do another summit type event, and I've had a chance this week at the Canada Strong and Free Networking Conference, which is formerly the Manning Center for Public Policy Conference here in Ottawa. They added an extra day. We had incredible speakers. I had a chance to meet with people from all over the country and network with them. I had the pleasure of making a new friend, Nadine Ness. Her and I have been on interviews before. And Nadine is from Saskatchewan. She's an organizer there, focused on the school issues, really helped to move the Scott Moe government towards getting rid of controversial books in schools and stepping forward in with policies to protect kids in the education system. I had a chance this week to shake hands with Premier Blaine Higgs. He was one of the presenters at the conference, and to thank him personally as a dad of someone who fits all the patterns of being socially transitioned at school, or at least supported in a false identity, a gender identity, and the school aided and abetted my child. So I was able to share that with Blaine Higgs and why I feel it's so important that he's doing the work that he's doing. Presentations from Danielle Smith with comments about gender there. We also had the chance to chat with communications experts and political strategists. And so when we're talking about the upcoming Parents' Rights Coalition of Canada event in May and a couple of protest days that are coming up, I have some strategies, or we're developing some strategies to share with parents across the country and how to effectively engage with the school boards in this new climate. And what I mean by new climate is after Cass. All right. I've got a trip coming up, and if you are west of Ottawa in Canada, I'm going to be going across the country and back starting in June. A good part of the summer, I think I will be on the road, and I want to float this as an opportunity to an invitation to network and meet in person. If you're below that secret threshold and you can't be public, happy to meet quietly for coffee somewhere and shake hands. And if you happen to think of an opportunity for a speaking event, if you want to put together people in a living room or in a small public venue, I would be very happy to put together a speaking presentation and share some strategies with people in person. What we're finding in this work is that there's real magic that happens when we can get together. So I'm very charged up and inspired by this conference that we were at this week. And it came, sort of less than 24 hours after the cast review. I was able to digest a little bit. I had a conversation with a school trustee who I won't name this week. I'll dig a little bit into that because that's part of the strategy that we're going to be sharing with people through that Parents' Rights Coalition event coming up in May. And I took some initial steps to start to have conversations with school trustees. I won't name who they are or where they are. Actually, I've had conversations with several trustees in the last week, as a matter of fact. And so there's just a ton to cover. The Governor General had a really badly ratioed tweet this week. And in spite of the CAS report, and I'm going to get into some details that make this even more scathing, in spite of the WPATH files, hi, Mia, with the conference in town, I had a chance to hang out with Mia Ashton, the otherwise known as Maria Hughes, the author of the WPATH report, on Friday night. What a room to be hanging out with people like Ruba Subramanya and Maria Hughes and good friends Chanel Fall and founder of Lighthouse, Catherine Cronus, and others. A lot of great singers, by the way. Good friend Chanel loves to sing karaoke, and it's a great way to socialize and build some real community. And the guitars came out, and it was just absolutely fantastic to be in such a historic room. Yes, more scathing in Nova Scotia than you can imagine at this point after the WPATH, after the CAS review, and I'm going to touch a little bit about on that. So let's start with CAS. What is the CAS review, and who is Hilary Cass? So I didn't fully understand Dr. Hilary Cass' background. I'm going to read just briefly from Wikipedia to familiarize you. Hilary Cass was appointed president of the Royal College of Pediatrics and Child Health with a 3-year tenure. So she was the top pediatrician in the United Kingdom. She's now retired. Between 2017 and 2020, she was chair of the British Academy of Childhood Disability and has served in numerous public domestic roles in the UK and also significant international ones. Very, very credible. She was selected because of her credibility and impartiality and her commitment to science. This project started 4 years ago, and it was after whistleblowers at the Tavistock Clinic, the GIDS Clinic, Gender Identity Disorder or Development Services in the UK, which was the largest pediatric gender clinic in the world, was found in scandal, whose evidence was found to be wanting. And the Kira Bell case, Kira Bell was given puberty blockers at 16. She had a double mastectomy, realized a couple of years later that this was a really detrimental path that she'd been placed on, and sued the National Health Services. And a bunch of stuff came out through court, and some of the stuff that came through court was that puberty blockers were never a pause button, that what study they had with 42 or 44 participants, 43 of the 44 participants in supposed pause button, time to think, had gone on to cross-sex hormones. And so really, instead of giving kids time to think, it actually locked in and concretized the gender dysphoria and with all of the attendant medical complications and associations related. And there's a bunch of scandal around the Tavistock Clinic. Hilary Cass was appointed to conduct this systematic evidence review. So what exactly is that? Now, I talked earlier in March when Amy Ham, nurse from BC, was going through they were doing the final arguments for her persecution by the BC Nurses and Midwives College. And Dr. James Cantor, incredibly respectable scientist with multiple areas of very high level of credibility, including statistics and research methodologies. He had testified back last year about the pyramid of evidence. And the pyramid of evidence is a it's a scientific way of ranking the quality of studies from, surveys on a street corner with a clipboard as, informal qualitative study to the highest level of standard of scientific rigor and analysis, which is the systematic review. And a systematic review is a study of studies, or includes that study of studies. It evaluates the quality of all the studies that it examines. And Dr. Hilary examined the research related to all of the major myths and lies of gender ideology, the suicide myth, the puberty blockers efficacy, the social transition and the validity of socially transitioning or not at schools, etc., and did the comprehensive review, which came out in full report this week. It's 388 pages. Now, obviously, there was a few people who got copies in advance, including some critics. What I understand is that Alejandro, transactivist lawyer from Harvard, with a specialization in technology and law, not actually in gender medicine. It seemed to have an advance copy, but so did the British government. And on Tuesday, the day before the CAS review was released, the British government issued directive to educators in the UK. No more gender ideology in schools. Yes, you heard it. No more gender ideology in schools. Now, immediately, of course, there's pushback from activists who are saying they're not going to abide by this. The activist teachers are going to continue to teach this stuff. But the directive was, and this may need more formal implementation, the directive was no more gender ideology. If children ask about it, teachers can talk about it. But in the context of conversations about gender ideology in schools, they have to disclose or to share with children that this is a contested belief. Now, like I was thinking about the extension of that. That's going to mean books in libraries that have been smuggled in, the ones that primary school kids can get, showing the mastectomy scars and, trivializing sex changes and the whole gender identity ideology piece. We can imagine that the Pride Progress flags and the celebration of transgender days of remembrance, etc., anything that's going to allude to this set of false beliefs is going to be recommended out of existence in the public education system. And really, it should have people should be at a point in looking at the evidence and realizing that everything that's been happening is wrong. But of course, they're not. So if we're talking about media analysis and what's happening online, there are people reframing their arguments, trying to establish that there's a couple of things happening. One was establish that the CAS report is actually a political document, not a scientific document, and that it's anti-gender activists and bigots and transphobes and all those things. The other thing that's happening is that there are some activists that are starting to say that, oh, we've been waiting for this for years. We're so thankful it's there. And, like the TERFs have been the problem all along. Carry on. The level of gaslighting is quite astounding. I've run an artificial intelligence query, an AI, that I'm going to dig into. I haven't seen the results yet as I started recording here, but I'm going to jump to that and I'm going to share a screen on it so that we can explore it a little bit together. And to see what the conversation around puberty blockers and gender affirming care globally how it's shaped since the beginning of March when Maria Hughes and Michael Schellenberger released the WPATH files and through the release of the CAS review. Now, let me jump. I'm going to share my screen. All right. So I have been using this tool in its current form for about 6 or 7 months off and on. This is an artificial intelligence that was built for public sentiment analysis, polling, political polling, public opinion, and market research. And it allows me to put a question. This is not a chat GPT, by the way. A chat GPT is rinky-dink compared to what this thing can do. The quality of data that we can get out of this ranks statistically and academically. It's backed by enough peer review on the methodology that they use that we can publish the percentages, much like a traditional polling, with things like margins of error. It scrapes public conversation data from multiple platforms: Twitter, TikTok, Insta. There's another one, Blue Sky, Reddit, and it aggregates the conversation in those spaces, and we can see the sample that they use is in the hundreds of thousands, or getting close to 1 million. I talked to the chief technology officer just a couple of days ago, and in this, using the sample, we can say that in global users, we can project based on a sample of 1 million users that we can project to the larger world just the number of conversations that are going on around this particular topic. And the particular topic that I gave Meili, Meili is what we call the AI for our project. I'm not going to share with you the name of the AI company, because they've actually they had to pay a price to work with me and work on this particular topic. And now that they've got a subscription model, I could ask whatever questions I want without interference from their staff. But there was actually a staff revolt, and people, there was some people who quit, and there was others who were trying to sabotage the company with their major clients, because the company had treated me like a customer without discrimination for the ideas and questions that we wanted to query. So I put in the topic of puberty blockers, and you can see by this arc here, what the AI does is it breaks down the nuance of the conversation into the total percentage. And okay, so just to toggle here, I'm going to show you a couple of things. I ran this query, puberty blockers, on global data, 1 month and 13 days. So I went back to March the 1st. That's before the WPATH files, Mia Hughes and Michael Schellenberger's expose of WPATH. Aggregate 1.7 million or projected 1.7 million engagements on the topic. And you can see here just how big and nuanced the conversation is. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14. We got to have about 16 subcategories here. The biggest category about puberty blockers is puberty blockers are necessary for puberty suppression. And I'm going to drill into that in a second. I just want to show you, because I made a boo-boo. When I first did the query, I did March the 1st, 2023 to today. And there were 15 million engagements. And the biggest nuance, or the biggest part of the conversation in the last 15 and a half months, as opposed to the past month and a half, is that blockers are an important part of gender affirming care, and blockers are an important part of gender transition, and another 8%. So we've got 37, 48, we got 55% of the conversation. We're getting into the 60s on being pro puberty blockers. Now, each of these categories in the arc here, I can drill down into, and I'm going to say, let's see. We've got 41% engagement around this topic, gender affirming care and puberty blockers. That's the cluster. And then there are 49 kind of discrete, nuanced conversations about this that they taper off. Here, related to gender affirming care and puberty blockers, 90% in that conversation cluster, that we call it a topic or a stance, are pro puberty blockers for gender affirming care. When we look back at the time period, I'm going to go just add a longitudinal chart. There was a giant conversation about puberty blockers and gender affirming care a year ago, May, June, globally. The huge, something in a news cycle. We can Google that time period and likely see that's the beginning of Pride Month. There was a bunch of pushback in Canada about the million marches and how we treat kids. So 22% of the people say strong opposition to bans on gender affirming care. So this is pro-trans. And then 17% bans on GAC are harmful and should be stopped. Coordinated efforts to eliminate LGBT. Now, this is the AI generating, kind of like ChatGPT does if you ask it to compose a poem. This gives you the summary of what this conversation is. So we've got 22%, we've got 17%, another 16%, so we're at 40, we're at 56%. Blockers are an essential part of GAC, and then another 12%. State bans on gender-affirming care for minors, causing panic and concerns. The bans restrict trans young people from accessing medical care. So let's see that. Let's see how it's changed. Okay, I just ran that 1 month. So we have the big longitudinal. If I was to really do this right, I would do a section of time, let's say a year before, up to February the 29th this year, because it was a leap year, and then I would pick up on March the 1st. And I would say how, and do a side-by-side analysis. How is it different? So now we have the big chunk of conversation here in the last, let's say 44 days, 42 days. Puberty suppression. Majority of social media posts. No, there's still pretty heavy there. Strong opposition to the decision by NHS to no longer prescribe puberty blockers for trans youth. Argue blockers are necessary. It's basically 2/3. So we've gone from over 80%. The public sentiment has shifted. The conversation has changed. We can see longitudinally where the big conversation happened. I don't think that the CAS report has really landed yet in the data that we were able to scrub. We can see that the WPATH conversation happening early in March really spikes in this longitudinal analysis. Sparked strong opinions. Some argue that forcing kids to go through the trauma of physical body changes before they are mentally prepared is a form of abuse. I'm sorry, that's called puberty. We can look also at the age categories that are engaged in this discussion. So the dotted line here is based on the sample size. We would expect, if everyone's talking about it in the same proportions, we would expect that, I can divide by sex. This is something I just learned. So disproportionately, females are higher participants in this conversation than males. This is not new. Let's go by age. We can see that a particular cohort here, it's the 45 plus that are engaged in the conversation about this. It's not kids. And probably disproportionately, if we go by visual, we can see that it's this 56 to 65. What happens if we go region? We can see that the US is outstripped on this conversation. In Europe, it's much lower than you might expect. You know, I recall a line something like, and I think this was Joseph Campbell, no one ever stands up to wave a sign and jump up and down that the sun is coming up tomorrow. So if you agree with something and just accept it as reality, generally, you're not out protesting about it. But if you're upset about it, then you're more vocal. So that's one of the interesting things about this. We can have reality. Reality is the science. Reality is the data. Reality is the research. We got the CAS review we're talking about today. We have the WPATH files and the scandal there. We've had various reviews and studies come out about the suicide myth, et cetera, in the last little bit. But the voices are the oppositional voices that are coming out. Where would we think? Really disproportionately in the United States. So I think this is activists. Avoid irreversible secondary sex characteristics and reduce the need for invasive surgeries. Again, disproportionately America, where this argument or this narrative is taking place, you can really see compared to Europe, huge. So there must have been a news cycle in the US about this. in the last 45 days. This is only a small group, 6.6. I'm getting real curious now. So we have a data gathering, a data analysis tool. We have a study tool that we can use to understand what the public conversation is around the world on these issues. And I'm collaborating with a couple of groups right now to fund this project. It's running about, it's $1,000 US a month plus applicable taxes for living in Canada. And we can do bespoke queries on public opinion, public sentiment. This project is called Meili. We started this under the nonprofit APISC Digital Research Foundation, which stands for Adolescent Peer Influence and Social Contagion. So we wanted to see if the AI could tell us about social influence and what social contagion is. And here's what I think social contagion is in the simplest terms possible. Social contagion is an emotion that moves through a group. I was at the Montreal and Ottawa Senators game last night. It was a great game. It's the last game of the season at home for the Ottawa Senators. It ended up 4-3 after overtime in a shootout. And the two teams, these classic Canadian teams, one of the Ottawa Senators was defunct for a long time, but came back, part of the original group of hockey teams in Canada, the Senators and the Habs. And you get the participation. We have these things called mirror neurons, okay? Mirror neurons are how we fall into a rapport or entrainment with others. We pick up other people's emotions and sentiments and even expressions. And this is part of our development. Babies, mimic and respond to facial expressions around them. They copy. And they also pick up on the feelings and I apologize, it's weird language, but they pick up on the energy around them. And people vicariously live through the competition on the ice. Or for video games, if people are playing video games and they're dodging and bobbing and weaving, and because they've extended their senses outwards from them. So we can see how social contagion moves through the entrainment that people have with their team on the ice, and how rapidly a spike in emotions or a fall in emotions moves through a group of people. That's mirror neurons at scale, and emotions can move this way. While I was at the hockey game last night, we got news about Iran firing missiles at Israel, and that set of events and the accompanying emotions, thanks to social media, spread rapidly throughout the world. And the other thing that's contagious, or that spreads like this, that conveys ideas, is language. Language is a very powerful vector of ideas, which also communicate emotions. And so the idea of gender ideology, that you can change sex. Let me jump back to the dashboard here. So here's how some of these ideas spread. And my hypothesis is that the idea of being able to change your gender, change your sex, vectored the same way. We originally thought, using this tool, that we could find overt and explicit circumstances of grooming. And I actually believe if we could adapt this tool for Tumblr, we might be able to track that. And we'd have to go back to kind of the dawn of the smartphone age, get back to 2013 to 2015, 2016, and this really heyday of Tumblr for this. And what you can see, so I put in the keyword cisgender. Cisgender is one of those cult words that belongs to for gender ideology. And we can see that its usage, this is a decade-long analysis of the term in aggregate groups, that it's an esoteric idea. Something happened in March of 2019 where it got some attention, maybe caught a bit of a news cycle somewhere, and it continued to bounce along the bottom here. And then cisgender became part of the lexicon. Well, if words and language is a proxy for ideas and even feelings, like transphobia is a charged word. It conveys a victim and an oppressor. It charges people up like a goal getting scored against your own team, and everybody reacts at once. Okay, so I believe that there's a study in here of using Meili to look at the evolution of language, bespoke language in the weird world of gender identity, that we can use this tool to understand some of those vectors and where they come from, and then we can overlay the correlating use the presentation and referrals to gender clinics as the proxy. As the language evolves, how closely is it tied to the increase in prevalence of presentation in gender clinics? So if you got questions about that, feel free. I love chatting about this. You can reach out to me, and we have a couple of people that are going to help fund this project. We're asking organizations that want to tap into this, and I'll be your kind of mediator, at least for the time being, at about at $250 a month US. And we can ask a couple of questions. We can design some studies, and I'll query, and I'm able to share those reports with people and allow them to, we can get conversation tactics and communication strategies, and we can do message testing, and we can try and figure out how do we overcome these really rigid ideological beliefs through good communication strategy. I'm hoping that you can see this. This is Dr. Hilary Cass. The reality is we have no good evidence on the long-term outcomes of interventions to manage gender-related distress. This is important. There's no good evidence after doing a meta-analysis of hundreds of studies and ranking them in terms of quality. There are no high-quality studies in any of this area. There are some medium-quality studies and a whole lot of low-quality studies. This isn't news. WPATH itself, the World Professional Association of Transgender Health, within its own documents and within its own kind of self-identification of who it is and what they're about, they say that the evidence is low. But the transactivists have continued to push this. One of the striking things from let's think this through perspective that occurred to me several years ago as I was looking at this is that because we've only started this a few years ago, and we've gone the puberty blockers and the cross-sex hormones, the affirmation whole process within the education system. Normally, we like to see long-term outcome studies, right? Clinical trials, evaluations. But because we've only been doing it for a few years, there is no capacity, because not enough time has elapsed from a lifetime perspective to say this is a good idea. But we've been going ahead with it anyway, rushed in. Hannah Barnes, who wrote the book Time to Think, gave a speech at the SEGM conference in New York, Society for Evidence-Based Gender Medicine. And it is just so obvious how bad this science is. It doesn't exist. Let's move. Okay. Social transition. So I mentioned this at school. Obviously, the school directives in the UK, they've actually given guidance previously about social transition at school. But the evidence around social transition is ambiguous at best. There's little evidence that it helps. The suicide myth has been debunked by multiple studies before the CAS. And with the analysis of the CAS, there's insufficient evidence to suggest this is a good idea. And so the recommendation is that no more social transition, because why would you? Children are going to naturally explore their identity over time. This is one of the quotes from CAS, or one of the sentiments that I'm sharing and paraphrasing. Our identities naturally evolve and change, and we explore different identities as we grow up. And so the social transition is a way of concretizing, or something that locks in, a transient identity. So kids should be left alone to explore that identity. Again, the government had early copies in the UK, and with the CAS review, the recommendations around puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones have changed. Previously, like Alberta government Danielle Smith and her new recommendations, which aren't legislation yet, that no medicines are given to kids under the age of 16. And the CAS review recommends that 16 to 18s only be given these cross-sex hormones or masculinization medications, feminization medications, with extreme caution. So they're ratcheting up the restrictions here, and because of legitimate concern. And one of the outcomes of the CAS review that's really come aware, within 24 hours of the report being digested by various groups, is that the UK is going to be undertaking a second systematic review, that of gender medicine for adults, to determine if this is effective or not. And it will, I rather doubt that Dr. Hilary Cass wants to give another 4 years of her retirement to a project like this, but we can assume that a credible scientist and researcher and someone with real chops is going to be able to oversee this adult gender medicine to get the real science on it. And in the meantime, the 18 to 25 cohort is being, cautioned, given extreme caution about transition, because kids, well, this is my words, kids and their brains aren't fully developed until 25 plus. We know this already, and have for some time. And so there are real, like, the brakes are on in the UK. Now, let's see. There was another country following this week that said that they're stopping these NHS to review all transgender treatment. Evidence for letting children change gender is built on shady foundations. That was the headline of the report that came out in Canada late Tuesday night, midnight or 12 a.m. on Wednesday in the UK. The pediatrician published her long-awaited review, the support and treatment offered to children who believe they're transgender. And extreme caution should be taken before anyone under the age of 25 transitions. This is a quote from the report, and there are many that could be quoted. There are a few other areas of healthcare where professionals are so afraid to openly discuss their views, where people are vilified on social media, and where name-calling echoes the worst bullying behavior, and this must stop. Now, the Tavistock wasn't just mired in sort of scientific and medical scandal. Last count, from what I understood, about 35 practitioners left the Tavistock because of bullying, or because they of conscientious objection to the methods, basically rapidly transitioning people. There was kind of a let's call it dark humor of saying that we're transing the gay away with these kids, because so many kids were lesbian, so many kids were suffering from autism, and there was just no checks and balances. Everything was identified under one rubric, and that was gender identity disorder, or gender distress, or being trans, and just marched through the pathway. Now, one thing I didn't mention at the beginning of this, there was a monumentally important Dr. Phil episode that aired on Wednesday. Dr. Phil, of course, in the US, and a whistleblower by the name of Jamie Reed. And I forget which clinic she was at, but in that session with Dr. Phil, she gives an account of being inside this clinic and the kind of practices that she was told and that it was insisted upon, and she eventually couldn't do it anymore, and has blown the whistle. She's been now a co-founder, I believe, of the LGBT Courage Coalition in the U.S. A friend of mine, Aaron Kimberly, is a member of that organization. And they're doing great work. So it was a giant week with Cass and with Dr. Phil, and we're really airing this out now. Of course, in Canada, nothing is changing. And speaking of bullying, sadly, in this conversation I mentioned a school trustee this week. One of the school trustees I spoke with brought up the issue of Richard Bilkstow, who tragically took his life less than a year ago, because of a DEI consultant anti-racism trainer by the name of Kike Ojo Thompson in Toronto, humiliated Richard in an anti-racism, anti-bias training in Toronto, and because he brought up a question. All right. So, when we look at that last slide, there are a few other areas where professionals are so afraid to openly discuss their views. This isn't just gender. Gender is part of a much larger issue of censorship, of social intimidation, social coercion, where people can't speak openly. And this trustee brought up what happened to Richard Bilkstow and sent to me that she had warned people about the kind of things that are happening with this diversity, equity, inclusion, about these kinds of trainings. She said she was actually surprised that this outcome had not manifested itself sooner, because she said, we have ruined so many people's lives. Shocking. But just like so many others, this trustee can't speak openly about these issues. Another trustee that I can name that I spoke to this week was Linda Stone. Linda Stone resigned from the Durham District School Board recently under the same kind of intimidation and threat environment and censorship. One of the things that was cited in her complaint, in the code of conduct complaint against her, was that she had commented or retweeted a speech that I gave on Parliament Hill on September 20th last year during the million-person march. So really, there's no capacity for questioning here. There's one ideological path, and that path in the world of gender is sterilizing and mutilating children, rendering them infertile and in some cases incapable of experiencing the joys and pleasures of intimacy in love with another person forever. And here we are. Nova Scotia Health, the same week. This is after CAS, Fostering Inclusive Healthcare in Kentville. Launch of a new gender-affirming clinic in Nova Scotia. Now, remember I said before CAS and after CAS? And, 5 weeks ago, we had the WPATH report. WPATH is the organization responsible for the guidance. It's the organization at the center of all of this ideological capture in the world of gender. So we had the WPATH files about how corrupt and incorrigible and beyond fixing this organization WPATH is. And here we have the smiling faces of these butchers in Nova Scotia celebrating the opening of another sterilization and mutilization clinic for children. Well, there's before CAS and there's before WPATH. And I'm going to share something with you. I've blocked out the names. This is one of several, let's call them secret societies, secret groups. This is collaborations with professionals behind the scenes and people like me. We're talking about educators. We're talking about doctors. We're talking about psychiatrists. We're talking about active parents, journalists, and retired journalists. These people talking behind the scenes because we've been intimidated out of public discourse. I have a question. Maybe someone else can answer this, because we presented to the Department of Health in Nova Scotia over a year ago on issues to do with gender affirming care, and here they are. We couldn't have brought a better lineup. And what my colleague and friend is saying here, well, I'll tell you what they're saying, that Hilary Cass presented to the Minister of Health in Nova Scotia a year ago. And they still went ahead with the WPATH recommendations. We have video of this. And can this be used in a legal context? Of course, the profession I missed in there, and I probably missed several, but lawyers. So get ready, people, because there's now a public liability. I did a video on Wednesday. I recommended people write to their Minister of Education, write to their Minister of Health, and write to their premiers, if their premiers have not already moved on this issue, to let them know that the CAS report is out and now there is no excuse. And here is one. Not just known for a couple of weeks, not just the line in the sand that happened a few days ago, but more than a year ago, to have the world expert talking to them and still going ahead. Now, here are these assholes. I'm not even going to ask for forgiveness. These fucking assholes. The Governor General of Canada this week hosts an environment, a reception for people who they claim get bullied online. These pathetic crybullies, these people who have and are continuing to have such an incredibly negative impact on so many lives. These people are ruining other human beings. They're ruining health. They're ruining fertility. They're ruining intimacy. These people in this room are responsible for the lockdowns that such a huge percentage of Canadians were objecting to, forcing and mandating vaccines that so many object to. And they're complaining about online abuse. The bottom left of the corner here, you see that I circled that they didn't allow any comments. And you can see just above that red circle, 421,000 views and 200 likes. I scrolled through you can see the little circular arrows if your screen is big enough. The circular arrows mean retweets or reshares and with comments. And I scrolled through. It's the let the people eat cake crowd gathering to moan about the hardships of being tyrants. Critter Cam Gorilla said 407,000 views and 203 likes. Seems like Canada knows our Governor General is zero ethics, a Liberal Party shill surrounded by pro-liberal activists. Your panelist called women filth for objecting to centering himself during the Montreal Massacre remembrance in Montreal. Who do we have next? Oh, this is himself. The people who are subjected to the most vile abuse are never invited to these events. Many of the individuals in that room are bullies who don't like any pushback whatsoever. Even polite disagreement is seen as violence. And look at you can't help but laugh at the faces here, because you can see the skepticism in the room behind Faye Johnstone. By the way, Tyler Cybulski knows bullying very well. He was a young man who was brave enough to stand up and run for a municipal councillor last year. Our zones overlapped. The council zones and school zones are different. And between Tyler and I, we just had we frequently met on sign patrol trying to repair the damage that was done to our election signs through vandalism and even arson. So Meili, the Parents' Rights Coalition of Canada, if you are the leader of a small community group, you have a handful of people in your school board, or you're working with others on a larger scale, or you're wondering how to organize, I really want to invite you to connect with PRCOC.ca. It's the Parents' Rights Coalition of Canada, because we're going to be providing more resources at a national scale. We want to bring in some big conversations and help you to organize simple efforts to get the CAS review on the record, to get the votes on this issue on the record within the school system, within the school boards. Because now that it's after CAS, people have fair warning. People now have, if notified, they have notice that the evidence isn't there. They have notice of the negative outcomes. And we want to get them on the record of voting against the science and the evidence, which means that they're voting to continue the social transitions in secret at school, which means that they're voting to continue to refer kids to the gender clinics behind parents' backs. They're voting to continue with books in schools. They're voting They're voting to continue with the bullying and intimidation that is par for the course. I've said many times, and it took me a while to realize this, but being a teacher in the public education system today is like living behind the Iron Curtain in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. It's an environment of totalizing lies, and anyone who disagrees with that environment of lies gets destroyed. So pay attention. Check out the PRCOC. There's a newsletter subscription that you can sign up if you want to get involved and you want to have notice of the upcoming events. Make sure you subscribe there. By the way, while we're on the topic, make sure you like and subscribe to our channel because we've added a bunch of subscribers. March was our best month ever. Our viewership is up. We're starting to get a few more utilities available to us on our YouTube channel. Melanie is working on the analysis of Marxism and the Marxification of education, the critical pedagogy. She's doing terrific work. It's really a skill set and talent of hers to be able to dig in and digest and articulate these kinds of things. She's going to be on a couple of interesting other podcasts in the near future. I may continue to fly solo for a little bit, or I may be inviting some co-hosts to join me. If you'd like to come on the show and you have the ability to speak publicly, please reach out. I would love to share some of your story, get some of your insights into what's happening in this world of gender ideology. So again, today, Shannon Boucher, your host. It is April the 14th, 2024. And if you can think of traveling in the summer across Canada from Ottawa to the West Coast and back again, maybe that social event is a picnic. Maybe it's a church basement thing. Maybe it's a coffee somewhere, or a presentation in a pub. And reach out, and I'm happy to be a guest and to bring in some resources and share with you. And this is a historic week. It's been very emotional. Let me finish with a quote. Now, I'm pretty sure I'm okay to share this because he said that he would collaborate with us and come on either the show or a panel or the upcoming Parents' Rights Coalition Summit in May. Dr. Roy Epen. Dr. Roy Epen has published he's an endocrinologist from Montreal, and some years ago said that he wouldn't see anyone who was presenting with gender dysphoria, partly out of self-protection, because if he focuses on adults, he focuses on certain areas of endocrinology to protect himself, because if you tread in the wrong way with some of these activist people, I mean, children are begging for these interventions. Children are begging for puberty blockers and for cross-sex hormones and for double mastectomies and for, this brings me not a children's story, but I'm going to finish off with the one big story that I didn't cover about gender in Canada in just a moment. Anyhow, Dr. Roy, when I saw him at the conference, it was the next day, or within hours of the cast review coming out, he was thrilled. It's over, he said. It's over. The fact that they're doing a systematic review of adult gender medicine in the UK and taking it out of schools means it's over. Now, the question is, how long is it going to take us to communicate to the rest of the world that it's over, and how much more of this batshit crazy stuff has to happen before we do? So in Ontario, we talked about this last week. There was a court hearing this week about a non-binary man who wanted to have genital surgery for his non-binary identity to keep his penis functioning while having a neo-vagina created. And Canada doesn't perform surgeries like this. There's only one clinic in the States, which is known for doing for doing surgeries that create physical outcomes that don't occur in nature. Real crazy stuff. So he wanted to have a penis and a neo-vagina on top of the normal equipment. I don't know how the surgeons are going to create that circumstance. But you know what normally happens, and I apologize for this, but it just goes to how utterly absurd and grotesque this ideology is, and how depraved our legal system and health system is to facilitate this. In order to create a neo-vagina, the normal process is to take the skin of the penis and invert it, and then to refashion a facsimile of labia around this neo-vagina. But sometimes there isn't enough tissue, and so they take a section of colon. Some of the real turfs call this a rot pocket, because the skin of the colon never really changes its character, and I don't know why anyone would want to go there. But the best line I heard, and I'll finish off here, was that why not just have this guy's asshole identify as a vagina? The court said yes. OHIP is funding this surgery. He's off to Texas, I guess, unless there's another appeal by OHIP to stop this from happening. I wish it wasn't this crazy, and I wish I wasn't going to be sitting down to record another Gender Wars a week from now, but that's the world that we live in. Have a terrific week. My name is Shannon Boucher. Thanks for liking and subscribing. Follow me on Twitter at Shannon B. Douglas. Or you can follow, Melanie Bennett, and her handle is at FinkleDusty. It's spelled the way it sounds. Have a terrific week.